Hello and welcome to segment 2 of Your Brilliant Brain and the Wild World of Work. And today we're going to be talking about the Department for Status and Security, introducing the next of our key brain players. Now, if you'll remember from last time around, we were talking about a different department, that of the Department of Advancement and Fulfillment, also known as the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes, or Steve Peters' human, and the humanity center that it represents. And we explored the strengths and some of the vulnerabilities of this particular part of the brain and what that meant for us day to day. So for those of you that were able to access some of the additional resources, I'm hoping you've now got a slightly deeper understanding of what this means for you personally, and you've got some ideas as to how you might be beginning to strengthen up your CEO. Don't worry if you haven't had a chance to have a look at that yet. You can go back to that at any time that you like. Doesn't matter. Today we're going to be introducing the next of the key areas we need to be aware of as we think about building this out into a holistic view of what's going on in our minds, especially while we're at work, but in life as well, so that we can make any changes or any development that we might like to do. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the limbic system. It's what I'm calling the Department for Status and Security. And do remember, the different departments is just a slightly different way of thinking about this wonderfully complex brain that we all have. And here is where I think it becomes particularly useful for us to think about it as different departments, because it is going to tie in with some of what we will experience on a day-to-day basis in a larger organization. So I'm hoping that just helps it make sense a little bit more. So the world of the limbic system. This is Steve Peters' chimp. So if you love the Steve Peters model, here's the chimp. We're going to be talking about the chimp, the bit everyone gets really excited about for good reason. You might also like to think about this particular part of the brain as operating a little bit like a bodyguard for you as a physical entity. So have a look over there onto the right-hand side. You'll see some of the key areas of responsibility for the Department of Status of Security for this particular brain region. And what you might notice is that there's a certain degree of crossover between advancement and fulfillment and status and security. In some ways, there are some similarities. It's about status optimization over here, you know, being the best that we can or getting the best that we can. I guess the primary difference I'd like you to encourage you to think about here is for this particular department, the limbic system, the view is rather more protectionist. This is much, much more about getting the most for you. Personally, this part of the brain is responsible for maximizing your gain, whereas advancement and fulfillment is a little bit more about, sure, being the best possible version of yourself, but rather more connected with the environment that you find yourself in, with a bit more give and take. Now, that's not to say that people around don't matter to the limbic system, but whereas the prefrontal cortex, the humanity center, is interested in group, as in much bigger than itself, perhaps. Here we're talking more about troop, immediate group. So that might be an immediate family, that might be a team, that might be a circle of friends. It's smaller and closer, whereas the humanity center is rather more interested in societally or culturally. It's bigger. So we've got slightly differing requirements in terms of fitting into these things, with one of them wanting us to be our best selves, a good citizen, if you like. This one just wanting us to get the best we possibly can within these important social groupings that we are part of. It's also about looking after us as a purely biological entity as well. So things like ensuring that biological drivers like food, shelter, a mate, offspring, children, if those are relevant, these key drivers, if they belong to a person, it's the limbic system that will be very, very keen to make sure that those needs are met, those responsibilities from a biological perspective are fulfilled, if you like. But if we're to go back to our analogy of thinking of the brain as an organization, if you imagine that the head of advancement and fulfillment is a very modern leader, totally up to date on all of the modern management and leadership literature and training, right up there, totally gets it, really, really interested in pursuing that. This department has, how do I put it kindly, a head of department who's a little bit more rogue. This department is led by someone who thinks they're operating on the rules of the Wild West, or as Steve Peters would put it, on the rules of the jungle. This particular department head is not up to date and modern. This particular department head thinks they are still operating in a space where risk is everywhere, and that therefore you need to be ready to defend yourself at all times with great vigor and great energy. This is absolutely crucial to bear in mind. So when we look at an annual review from this particular brain department, what we notice is immediately it's not a satisfactory performance, it's strong. In fact, this particular brain department would pat itself on the head and say it's totally smashing it. And from this particular brain department's point of view, it is. Look at all that amazing stuff it's really great at. It is super rapid in response. It doesn't need to take its time and think about stuff. It just acts. And it reacts. It's very, very good at protecting us from an ego perspective. It will wade right in there and defend us if someone is implying that we're not particularly clever, or we've made a mistake, or we were perhaps in the wrong. It will wade right on in there and defend that ego for us. As I mentioned, it's very, very good at looking after our key biological drivers as well, resource sourcing and resource protection as well. It likes to help us stay feeling like we're accomplished, because after all, from an ego perspective, that's really nice. And so it's very good at things like getting rid of any idea that we might have been wrong, blame deflection. And it's always on the lookout for anything that it considers might be threatening. Hiding underneath my head there is a last point that says it's also bilingual at the very, very least. It speaks 2 languages, whatever your mother tongue is, and non-verbals, body language, speaks that lightning fast. And of course, if you speak other languages, you can add those on top as well. So from its point of view, it's smashing it. However, if we were to step back and look at it a bit more as CEO of organisation, us, we might notice a few challenges and concerns. Because of its lightning fast response, it's not very good at considering what might happen next, the sort of consequence assessment. And in order to be so fast, it has to follow hunches, it has to jump to conclusions, it goes on its opinions or how it feels. It is highly reactive. It's not pausing to think, it reacts instantly. It's also often quite territorial. Some limbic systems, some chimps can be quite aggressive. Some are rather more into running away. So this is fight, flight or freeze. So depends on the flavour of the chimp, the flavour of the department head, as to what yours is going to feel like. But reactive, whether that is to get quite feisty or to sort of close up and mentally run away, that's all part of this. This particular part of the brain also likes to get the maximum it possibly can with the minimum possible effort. So some of us might consider it's occasionally a little bit lazy. It really doesn't like being held to account or being made to do anything it doesn't want to do. And it can be highly uncooperative, and its focus is on self. So it might be perceived as being somewhat self-centered, somewhat selfish. All of that, though, makes perfect sense when we look at it from the point of view of this particular brain center being about survival and maximizing what is available as an entity as you survive. following the rules of the jungle or following the rules of the Wild West. That makes sense of everything that it does. And when we think about it as being our bodyguard, wading in to protect us, if it thinks that someone's not behaving quite right, then it makes perfect sense. It would do whatever it does in those scenarios. And that we wouldn't necessarily, from a more holistic perspective, agree with that or find that useful when we reflect on it later on. But there it is. And here's the thing that we really need to wrap our head around, the thing that's really important to take away at this point in time, is the human and the chimp. Those two different brain centers, advancement and fulfillment, security and protection, they both exist in the same place at the same time. They're both in here. Two completely different systems operating at the same time. In fact, they first started developing when we were in utero. They have been there from the very get-go. And I love the way Steve Peters describes this. He says, you know, at some point, as we begin to develop, after we're born, the connections begin to form and they kind of shake hands and they say hello. They meet one another. But they are not always aligned. They have very differing viewpoints on imperatives and definitions of success. And here they are exactly like differing departments in a large organization that may very well have differing goals. They've got differing KPIs, differing things they're being measured on, differing things that define success. And yes, sometimes they are not going to be aligned. They're not going to see eye to eye and they're not going to get on. And it's exactly the same here. These two brain centers are right there all the time. They're right there right now as you're listening to this, right there, right now, doing their own thing. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes they will be completely aligned. They both want the same thing. They both agree on what would be desirable. And here we get the best outcome because we can use the enormous strength and energy that comes with the limbic system and its boundless energy to help the prefrontal cortex and the human part of us push through any potential challenges or difficulties in order to get to the place that we want to get to. Things like motivation, willpower, that kind of thing. That all runs out at some point. Imagine if you've got a chimp on board who also thinks it's a good idea, then you're going to be able to access that energy. But there'll be many, many other times where they disagree on what the right course of action is. And here, we're going to have a little bit more of a challenge. So I'll give you a very mild example. Imagine that human you has decided you'd like to get a little bit more healthy. You'd like to eat slightly more healthy food. And so you put yourself on a healthy food diet. Lovely. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what could possibly go wrong is that actually the limbic you, chimp you, has a little bit of a fondness for sweet stuff or crisps or chips or something like that. And it doesn't particularly care about getting healthier. It just wants the chips. It just wants the chocolate. It just wants the cake. So imagine this. You find yourself in an environment where exactly that is on offer. Who's gonna win? Well, anyone who's ever tried doing this is already going to know the answer to who's going to win. And it certainly, unfortunately, isn't always human you. It's not always what you want to do aspirationally. Many, many times, it's actually the chimp that's going to win here. And because the chimp is very fond of things that it likes, the chimp has a tendency, if it perceives that something is going to be a limited resource, such as it might not get to eat those chips again later because maybe you'll be a bit stronger and be able to resist, it's going to eat more of them. So the chimp does have a fondness for binging on resources that it perceives to be limited in resource or that might not be there later. And so it will stuff its face with chips or chocolate or anything else it's not supposed to be doing. So there's a rather tricky reality for us to wrap our heads around here, and that is this, that much as though we might like to think that surely in any tussle at any time, it should always be the thinking part of the brain, CEO us, who gets to decide what happens next. The reality is, if there's a tussle, if there's any question whatsoever, unfortunately, that's not the case. Unfortunately, CEO and the human part of the brain is not going to be the winner. The chimp is. And we need to expand this out a little bit more to really make sense of it. But the best way to think about this is to realize that from the overall organism's perspective, the overall brain's perspective, it has to decide what order of priority should it treat certain things. And from its point of view, our physical safety has to be of greater priority than us becoming the best version of ourselves. After all, from its evolutionary perspective, if you're not alive, you can't be the best version of yourselves. And therefore, survival and security have to be prioritized. And that is why the chimp part of the brain, the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for ensuring that that happens, has so much more power than the part of the brain responsible for allowing us to optimize both ourselves and the environments that we are in. And that is quite profound in terms of the way the brain is wired and the way the brain operates and views the environment around it. It's important for us to realize that the whole system isn't operating on a basis of optimization. It's operating on a basis of minimizing risk, minimizing threat. The whole system of organization, us, is governed by a delicate balance between risk and reward, safety and threat. And it's this that we are going to be teasing forward, both in terms of the rest of the program, but also in terms of additional resources and things for you to think about, because it's understanding this is what's going to allow us to learn how to thrive with this as the backdrop, this as our fundamental reality as human beings. Risk and reward, risk and reward. It's what that amygdala, deep down in the brain, is constantly assessing our environment for. And it isn't just a tussle about whether or not we should be eating crisps or chips or chocolate that's at stake here. It's a tussle about which of those two brain centers is making the decisions, if you like, is in control, is in charge, is taking action in any given moment. And this is particularly the case for us day to day, and very much so at work. Now, you might very well be wondering, well, what on earth kind of risk could there possibly be for the average modern human being, especially in the West, in the workplace? You know, we've got rules and systems that govern making things physically safe. And as I mentioned earlier, for the large proportion of UK workers, their working environment is safe because we have rules, we have regulators to ensure that that's the case. But the limbic system isn't only interested in physical safety, it's also interested in its psychological safety, in its societal safety, in its group safety. And here, there is much to be keeping an eye out for, much to be keeping an eye on. Because from a limbic system's perspective, there is a world full of threat out there, especially from the relational, the psychological, and the emotional point of view. And to make matters even more challenging, that threat doesn't even have to be real. Our internal drivers just have to perceive it might be, and the threat will be treated in exactly the same way. So what I've got up on the screen at the moment are some examples of what a threat in a workplace might look like. In all honesty with you, I could have written 4 or 5 or 6 different screens with lots and lots of different threats. This is just a summary of some of the threats that we might potentially face day to day in our working worlds and also in our social groupings as well. The rule, of course, remains the same. When a threat is perceived, it's going to be our chimp that handles it, not our human. And if you look at that list and think, oh my goodness, my workplace is absolutely riddled with potential threat, you'd be getting the idea. The modern working world is riddled with threat, and that, unfortunately, is the backdrop in which we are at the exact same time trying to be the best version of ourselves, trying to move ourselves forward, trying to do things like learn and develop and cooperate and succeed, all against this backdrop of the wild, wild west, the jungle of threat that is out there, making that more challenging with every step we take and every experience we have. So this is why Steve Peters calls his second book The Path Through the Jungle, because that is what we need to learn to find for ourselves. And that is what I am hoping to support you with as we go through the program. The rule is simple. When a threat is detected, it's not smart ass that gets to choose what happens next. It's our chimp, our bodyguard, who will instantly step in and from its perspective save the day. Regrettably, that often makes life more complicated for human us. Later on, when the threat has subsided and the chimp's gone quietly back to sleep in a corner, and the human is left having to deal with the fallout of that nippy-toned email, that irritated phone call, that slightly less than polite way we responded to a customer or a colleague or peer. Many of our day-to-day experiences suddenly start to make sense when we recognize what's actually happening in our brain and why it's happening. We're going to be going on a journey to explore all of it in more detail, but there's the basic mechanics of it. I'm hoping that begins to feel like it's making sense, not just to you, but also of some of your experiences. Because the reality is this. In every day, we are likely to flit from being in human mode to chimp mode. Depending on what's going on around us, is going to depend on how often that happens. For many of us, our chimp makes choices and has reactions and behaviours that aren't necessarily ones that we would, on reflection, be particularly proud of, or particularly delighted to have let other people see. Every now and then they might be really quite disruptive or cause us quite a lot of hassle. We may have said something that we shouldn't have, that we now need to go away and amend that. Alternatively, especially if we have a withdrawing, running away type of chimp, we might have not said something that we really should have. And that causes issues and challenges all of its own. Even worse than all of that is the dawning reality that actually a large proportion of our time without specific development and training, our CEO isn't even aware of any of this, hasn't got a clue. Like so many CEOs in large organizations, is only aware of a very narrow slice of information that's being fed up from the very, very top. Not very aware of what is actually going on day to day on the shop floor, on the office floor. But now we're aware of the dynamic, there is actually plenty that we can do about it. There is plenty of room for developing and enhancing not only our CEO and our human, but also beginning to learn how to better manage that chimp too. And super excitingly, there is actually even a way of getting the chimp to dial down the perceived risk and spend more of its time snoozing in a corner and less of the time deciding it needs to leap to our defense. So, how might we take those first exciting steps? Well, First up, you really need to understand exactly what it is that you are managing. So it's really helpful, although it might seem a little peculiar, but trust me, once you get into it, it's actually quite good fun to get to know your chimp. Now, Steve Peters is very, very keen that you do this, and he recommends that you give it a name. Say hello. Find out all about it. Get a real feel for its personality. So you'll need to start to tune into those moments that you recognize you were emotionally reactive. And those are the ones where it's a great place to start. So if you're wondering what that might look like, that would be any time where you realize you are feeling a heightened level of emotion, especially what we would consider to be the less desirable emotions, such as anger, frustration, annoyance, but also things like hurt, upset, disappointment, these kind of things as well. If we begin to tune into what we're experiencing, then we're going to begin to get a sense of what are the thought patterns, what kind of personality would we say that part of us has. That's what we're looking to try and identify. So giving all of that a name is actually a very well understood process. It's called labeling, and it just helps make something that otherwise would be terribly intangible just sort of floating around our head. It helps us recognize it quicker, and it helps us access some of what comes with it quicker. So labeling, very, very effective way of very quickly getting to understand and spot some of our patterns of behavior or thinking much more quickly, much more easily. Getting a feel for what that looks like, feels like overall, just allows us to spot all of that much, much quicker. And then we can begin to start to notice what actually seems to set that off. You know, what makes us annoyed, what makes us angry, what makes us upset, what typically makes us feel hurt or leaves us in some way feeling emotionally unsafe or unhappy, because these are the places that we find chimp activity. So in the extra resources, I'll make sure I've got some more stuff on that. But that, for anyone that doesn't have time for that, there you are. That's where you would begin to want to try and go away and just notice. You don't have to do anything else. Just tune in, just notice. You'll be astounded what you find. But there's another thing that we can do to layer that up that's going to be even more exciting. And that I'm going to be introducing next time around as we find out more about the Department for Efficiency. That's also known as Steve Peters' computer. Believe it or not, this department, it doesn't look very exciting, it doesn't sound very exciting, is exhilarating from a developmental enhancing self perspective, because it's this department that is actually faster than the chimp. And the chimp's lightning fast. This is even faster. Even better, if the chimp is not sure what it should do or what to make of a particular situation, it checks here first. So when we understand the Department for Efficiency, the computer, the database that every single one of us have, a little better, we can actually begin to start to make changes that, as I said, are going to dial down the threat and allow our chimp to go back to snooze more often. And if we work harder on that and keep going, it will learn to snooze more and more often. It will even learn that actually it's highly likely and highly possible that we can train our human to deal with stuff that previously the chimp would have considered it was not good enough for and would have taken over. We can actually train it to notice and believe that it doesn't need to get involved, because our human and our CEO are more than capable of dealing with things. And so there's absolutely no threat there. This is the exciting journey that we're going to be continuing next week. I cannot wait to share more with you when we get there. But for now, let me tell you a little bit about what to expect in your session 2 resource pack if that is something that you have the time and the inclination to use. Remember, these are extra resources, extra little video clips, that kind of thing, to help you bottom this out for yourself and explore areas that you might be interested in a little bit more detail. So there is going to be a slightly deeper dive on the chimp's world, how the chimp views the world around it, and crucially, why on earth would it be so very, very easily emotionally rattled or threatened? What's all that about? So there's going to be some more content on that. Then I'm going to give you some ideas to help you begin to do a chimp meet and greet. So some very simple ways of beginning to spot your own chimp when it's in action, and perhaps begin to identify how you might best describe it, what kind of name you want to give it. And of course, at the same time, we are also doing a CEO meet and greet. And just so that you all know that I'm not sitting here trying to pretend that I've got it all together without any chimp interference at any point in time, I will actually be sharing a little bit about my chimp, my inner world from that perspective, just so that you've got some sense of what that might look like for someone else, as let's face it, not everyone is always going to be happy to share this part of themselves with you. So I thought, do you know what? I really don't mind sharing that with you folks, just so it might give you some sort of idea. What exactly are we talking about here? And crucially, what can we notice if we begin to start paying attention? So all of that in your resource pack underneath this recording, if you are interested. If you're not, don't worry. You'll just be able to come along next week and continue the journey nonetheless. So one last request from me, please. If you're enjoying our program, please, can you share with your colleagues, friends, family, anyone else that you think might enjoy it? After all, they can now catch up on demand using the Academy platforms, so they don't need to have come along with us thus far. They are going to be able to access the same content using the on-demand feature. If you are the type of person who doesn't mind sharing stuff to your socials or using hashtags or anything like that, we would be so grateful if you could help us spread the word. We are just a very small company, and we would love to get this knowledge and this information into the hands of as many folks as possible, in the hope that more people can thrive in their working worlds. Of course, if there's something not right, if you're not enjoying it, please drop me a line. The email is floating around somewhere on one of the slide packs. Please do just get in touch. Let me know why not, and I'll do my very best to try and make things better for next time. Remember, we are still in beta test mode, and so your thoughts are of crucial importance as we look to enhance and develop the program further. But for now, I'm going to stop talking and let you take this wherever you would like to go. I'll see you next time around. Take really good care. Bye-bye.